Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unlocking something absolutely fascinating. We're looking at the hidden underlying mechanics of persuasive language. Have you ever wondered how some people can just effortlessly guide a conversation, totally bypassing any resistance or argument? Well, the source text we're analyzing today breaks down exactly how that happens. We're going to explore what are known as the architectures of neurological influence. And to be clear, these aren't just cheesy scripts you memorize. They're basically invisible linguistic machines that actually shift the way the human brain processes reality. Okay, let's dive right in. So think about this for a second. What could possibly connect the ancient philosopher Socrates, modern FBI hostage negotiators, and notorious cult leaders like Charles Manson or the founders of Enixelium? It sounds like a high-stakes mystery spanning over 2,500 years of history, right? Well, our source material points out that these vastly different figures all discovered and relied on the exact same linguistic machines. And they did this entirely independently of one another. Socrates used specific questions that made his opponent's logic literally eat itself alive. FBI negotiators use extremely specific phrases to get a barricaded suspect to just say, "That's right." And recruiters for cults use the exact same structures to make recruits feel like they're completely volunteering their compliance.
That brings us to our core definition. An architecture of influence is essentially a sentence structure that makes the other person's neurology do the work. The absolute crucial point here is that true influencers never actually argue their points. They never push. Instead, they deliver an architecture, a very specific framing, and let the listener's own brain finish the job for them. Now, the words themselves might change depending on the situation you're in, but the underlying structure remains exactly the same. You're basically building a framework that the other person's mind naturally wants to step right into. Think about the difference between pushing an argument and actually creating conditions. Pushing usually creates immediate automatic resistance, but creating conditions, that's entirely different. Our source text explains that everyone from crisis counselors on a suicide hotline to cult leaders uses these exact same neutral tools. The language itself doesn't have a moral compass, right? It's simply a mechanism for creating psychological conditions. So rather than forcing an idea onto someone, you use these architectures to create the conditions under which their brain naturally adopts your reality as their own. Here is our map of the human mind for today. We're going to guide you through 4 distinct families of psychological impact. First, making them argue for you. Second, collapsing resistance. Third, the power of identity. Fourth, creating a sense of inevitability. And finally, the ultimate open loop. All right, let's jump straight into family 1, make them argue for you. The golden rule for this family is simple. Never state your position. Instead, you construct a sentence where the only available exit is through a door that you built for them. This is brilliantly illustrated by our first technique, which is called the reversal. The source text shares this incredibly powerful micro-narrative of a suicide hotline worker. A person calls in wanting to die. The counselor asks, "How much do you want to live on a scale of 1 to 10? The caller hesitates and says, "I don't know, maybe a 3. And then the counselor asks, "Why didn't you say 2? Automatically, instinctively, the caller starts explaining why life is actually worth living. The counselor didn't push. They didn't try to convince them of anything. The architecture of that sentence left the caller with only one direction to move, which was toward arguing for their own survival. This leads perfectly into what is called the impossible question. When you ask someone, what would need to be true for this to feel like the obvious move, there is literally no answer they can give that takes them further away from where you want them to be. Every single response builds a path forward, and the crazy part is they are the ones drawing the map. Furthermore, our source highlights that when you ask someone to specifically name the one thing standing in their way, you actually shrink the barrier. It's a lot like the timeless essence of the Rumpelstiltskin tale. When you name a fear or a hidden script out loud, you instantly make it smaller and far less powerful. Moving right along to family 2, how to collapse resistance. To collapse resistance, we have to use wall-dissolving sentences. These are specifically designed to move emotion out of the reactive brainstem and push it up into the logical cortex. And the way they do this is simply through accurate labeling. Let's look at the preframe. When people are highly emotional, they very often confuse anger with hurt. But anger wants to fight, while hurt softens people up. Hostage negotiators, like the famous Chris Voss, utilize this all the time by relabeling emotions. If you tell someone, what you're saying right now, it doesn't sound like anger, it sounds like hurt. You completely change their relationship to the situation. Their nervous system registers that another human being just accurately saw what's happening inside them. And just like that, the person who was fighting defensively a few seconds ago suddenly shifts into someone who simply needs to be heard. This connects right to the witness technique. Imagine looking at someone and saying, "I can tell you carry a lot for other people, and it seems nobody's ever said that out loud to you." Our source explains that when a person feels genuinely and accurately witnessed like that, the brain's default mode network actually goes offline for a moment. The prefrontal cortex slows down its filtering. Basically, every time we feel truly seen, our brain flips a safety switch that tells us, "You are safe," and we cannot consciously control that switch. But here's the catch. You have to be genuine. If you don't actually see what you're naming, their defensive wall's going to slam back up harder than ever. Then we have the voluntary confession. This one is so subtle. You simply state, "There is something not being said here, and I want you to know whatever it is, I can handle it." Look closely at that framing. You aren't accusing them. You aren't saying you're lying or you aren't telling me something. You're just naming the mere existence of the silence. And by adding "I can handle it," you're communicating immense strength. You're telling them the truth won't break you. By doing this, you're making the psychological cost of their silence much heavier than the truth itself. You extract a voluntary confession without ever having to act like an interrogator.
Next up is Family 3, the power of identity. These are sentences specifically built to install an identity. And here's the secret. Once accepted, the other person's own brain essentially turns into an internal police force that enforces this new behavior from the inside out. Let's break down the mechanics of identity confirmation. First, you observe a genuine quality. Second, you name it as their actual identity. And third, you leave a door open. For instance, you might say, "Has that level of composure always been a thing for you, or did something change along the way?" You are recognizing an identity rather than assigning it. And since nobody resists being accurately recognized for something positive, this framework seamlessly bypasses all of a person's natural defenses. They feel recognized, and they'll naturally walk right through the door you just opened to confirm it. The real magic trick for this next one is genuine surprise. This architecture is called the gap. When you tell someone that their current hesitation doesn't match the strong identity you've known them to have, you cause an instant psychological fracture. Because you've expressed genuine surprise, it forces the listener into a tight corner. They have to either accept a diminished identity as someone who hesitates, or they have to take immediate action to close that gap and prove who they really are. Again, their own brain does all the enforcement for you.
All right, Family 4, creating a sense of inevitability.
These sentences are designed to completely erase a person's existing frame and replace it with an inescapable psychological reality. Remember, our source states something really profound here. Identity will beat logistics 100% of the time. This brilliantly illustrates a technique called regression. When you activate a highly specific childhood memory, like asking about the first time a teacher truly believed in them, you effectively kick the calculated, armor-wearing adult completely offline for a few crucial seconds. The source explains that whatever you say immediately after that regression, while that open, vulnerable state is still active, is going to land fundamentally differently than anything you could ever say to their heavily defended adult self. Which brings us to the exit seal. Listen to this phrase and just imagine a deliberate Socratic pause right after it. You already know what you need to do, and you've known for a little while. This statement implies three massive things all at once. The answer already exists inside them, they've actively been avoiding it, and you can clearly see both of those facts. There's no pitch happening here, there's no push. It simply opens a profound psychological loop that logic absolutely cannot close.
Finally, number 5, the ultimate open loop, the payoff. Tying all 17 architectures together under one unifying rule, let's take a step back and reflect on everything we've just covered. Not a single one of these architectures told the listener what to think. Not one of them argued a position. We usually think of persuasion as convincing someone, but these tools don't convince. They influence by creating the exact conditions needed for the listener's own mind to arrive at the destination naturally. These invisible linguistic machines are operating all around us, every single day. So the real question is, now that you can clearly see the architecture behind the words, how will you use them to create the conditions for your own reality? Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer. Until next time, keep analyzing the structures behind the conversations in your world.